The Afghans who are fighting us in this occupation have no view on the shortness of the girls' skirts in Ottawa, or the existence of lotteries, or the existence of casinos, or lap dancing clubs. They're interested in one thing only, which is to drive out the foreign occupier from their country. And any dignified people occupied by foreigners would feel exactly the same. It's just that the Afghans are really rather good at it. The British have already left 2 huge armies dead in Afghanistan in the 19th century. The Russians left scores of thousands dead in their period in Afghanistan. And we, if we stay there and continue this policy, will leave thousands of our own young men dead there also. And it's my belief that Karzai, the kleptocratic, vote-stealing mayor of downtown Kabul, his administration is not worth the blood of another single Canadian soldier. That's my view. Of course, we have one legitimate demand which we must make in these negotiations. Our legitimate demand is that Afghanistan does not become a base again for this transnational terrorist phenomenon of Al-Qaeda, bin Ladenism. That's a legitimate demand for us. It's a demand for which I myself would be prepared to fight. The problem is, those terms are available now, and they were available last year, and the year before. They were available at any time in the course of this entire war, which means, and it's a melancholy truth, that every life lost in the course of these 10 years was lost in vain. Because the one legitimate demand that we have, any government of national unity which emerges in Afghanistan after our withdrawal would have been prepared to grant. Indeed, Mullah Omar, the 6'3", one-eyed leader of the Taliban, you could see how difficult it would be to find him, who escaped on a motorbike 9 years ago, offered this before the war even began. And, by the way, Al-Qaeda are not even in Afghanistan. According to Bob Woodward, who has impeccable sources, I'm sure you know, at the heart of the American state, in his latest book, Obama's Wars, is oddly specific about this. He says there are 45 Al-Qaeda fighters left in Afghanistan. So, if there's only 45 of them, and we went there to fight them, why have we still got hundreds of thousands of soldiers with ever longer tours of duty? Especially as, and here's the rub, our presence in Afghanistan is recruiting soldiers for bin Laden and Al-Qaeda all over the world. In Somalia, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, in London, maybe in Canada, in the United States. The swamp of hatred and bitterness against us in the Muslim world, from which bin Laden draws his strength and his recruits, is ever deepened by our continued occupation of a country in which the enemy has actually left. And the unkindest cut of all, older viewers will know this, younger attendees may not. We're punishing the Afghan people now for having had, though no longer having, in their midst people that we sent to Afghanistan in the first place. This is grotesque. It is simply grotesque. Bin Laden was only in Afghanistan because Reagan and Thatcher gave him the money and the weapons and set up the political networks required to send them there on the immoral principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend. And we wonder why the blood of Muslims around the world is boiling with anger and rage at double standards and at these injustices, about which too more later. I just want to be sure that I'm not leaving any misconception here. I am completely against this global Al-Qaeda mindset and network. As I said in the House of Commons in a speech which won the last time I won the Parliamentary Debater of the Year, I said, pointing at the Tory front benches, I despise Osama bin Laden, a medieval, obscurantist savage. The difference is, I've always despised him. I despised him when you were giving him guns and money and sending him to Afghanistan in the first place. You know, on the eve of the Iraq War, there was a synchronized radio address. I know it's hard to stomach it, between Mrs. Tony Blair and Mrs. George W. Bush. They were making a feminist appeal for war. They asked us in this radio address, they even played some of the actuality, to remember those heartbreaking messages of farewell and love and grief left from their mobile phones on the answering machines of their families, of those doomed American women on board those aeroplanes on 9/11. I said at the time in Parliament, just because Afghan and Iraqi women don't have mobile telephones and their families don't have answering machines, it does not make their deaths delivered from the sky any less obscene than the deaths of those American women on board those planes on 9/11. And of course, that is a truth self-evident to us, but to the powerful in the world, the owners of these dirty Canadian newspapers, the politicians in Ottawa and London and Washington, it isn't true at all. The truth is, the blood of Afghans, Iraqis, Lebanese, Palestinians is much, much, much cheaper than the blood of Americans, Canadians, Israelis, or British folks. That is the truth. And if it's not recognized here, it's recognized in the Muslim world, and is one of the things that's deepening this swamp of hatred and bitterness of which I speak. You know, the constituency I represented until just a few months ago in the East End of London was itself bombed by these murderers motivated by the mindset of bin Laden. I went to the underground station on 7/7/2005. I watched as the emergency workers carried the dead and the dying and the broken, bleeding, from the bowels of the earth into ambulances and rushed to hospital. I went into the Parliament that afternoon. Mr. Blair was hiding behind the shrouds of all those 55 innocent dead in London that day, and behind the blood of the hundreds who were maimed that day. I told him, what happened in London this morning was an act of mass murder. Punishing innocent people for the crimes of guilty people is a sin in any religion, a crime in any language. They were all nodding. But the difference, I said, between us and you is that we think it's a crime and a sin whether it's done by a man with a beard and a turban in the Tora Bora, or a man in a suit in the White House or Whitehall or Ottawa or Tel Aviv or anywhere else that these crimes are organized from. So we say that people die the same deaths, whether they die from an exploding backpack on a train or an aeroplane hurtling into a building, as they do under attack by cruise missiles, by F-16s, by helicopter gunships, by tanks, by high-velocity weapons. The people are sliced by red-hot, razor-sharp steel and sheets of flying glass just the same. And it is your base hypocrisy that you can empathize and forever with the victims of the other people's acts of terror, whilst busily carrying out and planning to carry out ever more dastardly acts of terror yourselves. That's the truth of it, isn't it? And the fact that this double standard is not even recognized by the leader writers and the commentariat in the media and in the power circles in our countries is filling this swamp of bitterness and hatred with new blood on a daily basis. Let's talk about Palestine, which is the heart of the matter. The flaw at the heart of Western policy towards the East. The center of the confrontation between the Muslim world and the non-Muslim world. You see, for the powerful, the unkindest cut that they inflict is this. The Palestinians, who are the victims of terrorism, are called the terrorists, and Israel, which perpetrates the terrorism, is called the victim of terrorism. This double standard is simply impossible for Muslims, at least in the world, to accept. Palestine has been wiped off the map. It no longer exists as a country. Its people have been scattered to the four corners of the earth. I discovered 3 days ago, even to the Arctic Circle itself, there are 6 Palestinian refugee families living in Yellowknife on the edge of the frozen Great Slave Lake, with their children being born in the Arctic, from the Mediterranean to the Arctic. Generation after generation, millions now of Palestinians driven from their land, foreigners living in their houses and living on their property, whilst they, if they're lucky, make it to Canada or Brazil. If they're unlucky, they've lived out the last 62 years in rancid, rat-infested refugee camps in the Arab countries nearby, hunted from pillar to post, regularly massacred, without passports, without papers, without status. A people who were intended to go into the museum of ex-nations have instead insisted, we are Palestinians and we demand to go home to our own country and to our land. And I'm a religious believer. I have seen miracles in my life, and one of them is this, that